There is now a very big shift in the symbol imagery that we Americans are beginning to put out, and that change is something that is very, very significant at this moment.
We have to be as representative and inclusive and fair, and we have a responsibility to document history as it really occurred, not as it might have been interpreted by someone who had other motivations. Our responsibility is to people living today.
We need to enliven history so people reinvest their time and go and look at things and go consider how important people who came before were.
But I think it's only today maybe that people are understanding or appreciating the contribution of African Americans throughout time. I think without question, Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass are the two most famous Marylanders in American history. They're certainly the two most important. Frederick Douglass was born a slave in Talbot County in 1818. Harriet Tubman was born around 1822 in Dorchester County. They are native Marylanders, and the times that they lived in and the cause that they dedicated their life to was the abolition of slavery.
We're making a sculpture of Harriet Tubman, and we're making a sculpture of Frederick Douglass for the Maryland State Capitol in Annapolis. It's an important image that these two are now part of the iconography that also includes George Washington in the Capitol.
And so we wanted to make an experience that really brought to life the history of Maryland that occurred here and bring attention to Maryland's most important historic figures, Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. We are adding forensic bronze sculptures of them into the room, just like you see the statue of George Washington in this room. And they're coming in February, but they are long planned additions to the interpretation of the State House. So this is the old House of Delegates chamber. It has been recreated to its appearance in the 1870s. This is the room where the Constitution of 1864 was ratified. So the abolition of slavery took place here on November 1st, 1864. And the figure of Frederick Douglass will be standing right about here and sort of engaging visitors as they come into the space to imagine that they might be witnessing this really historic event. To have visitors today come in and see them in this place, a place that for many, many years had no interpretation of any African Americans, no images, and to now have people come in and, like they experienced George Washington in this room, to experience Tubman and Douglass and be able to touch those figures, to have children be able to see them and understand their importance in American history. It's long overdue.
I really feel that at this moment in our history, the depiction of these particular people is enormously important. And I just want to do it as well as we possibly can so that people have that takeaway. If they get there and they spend time, they're going to feel the presence of these people. They're going to read Frederick Douglass's works. They're going to invest their time in finding out more about Harriet Tubman. And I just think that informs, an informed public is hugely important.
Once I sculpt in all the
These statues are referred to as forensic bronzes, meaning they're created to be as exactly like the person as we possibly can be. So they're actual measurements, actual clothing that they would have worn in that period. So they're very much something that is meant to represent them on a human scale.
I think she's fantastic.
Actually, I make her neck a little smaller.
Yes, we're looking for an image that conveys something and some significance to the archives. And as a result, we have a photograph that becomes the blueprint for what it is that we're going to do. And then the sculpting, the wrestling with the sculpture begins.
I just try to visualize the information from the conversation.
Frederick Douglass arguably was the most important person to advocate for the abolition of slavery in America in the 19th century because of his personal story, having been born a slave and escaped slavery. Likewise, Harriet Tubman is the most famous conductor of the Underground Railroad in the United States. She also, born in Maryland in Dorchester County, achieved her own freedom by escaping and then going back and risking her life repeatedly to free her family members and many other people from Maryland. Frederick Douglass is the most photographed person of the 19th century, so it is not hard to find an authentic photograph of him and how he looked in 1864.
Douglass always had a sense of how he wanted to be depicted. He wanted African Americans to see him as a serious and proud person. And I don't think there's any mistaking the fact that when you look at Douglass, you see this extraordinary character coming through.
In order to make a connection to a living descendant of Frederick Douglass, we had his great-great-great-grandson, Ken Morris, go up to the studio in New York, and his hands were cast so that the sculptors can use those hands in creating the hands of Frederick Douglass. We felt it was important to make that tangible connection to a living descendant of this great Marylander. Well, our timing was good in that just a couple of years ago, a new photograph of Harriet Tubman was authenticated by her biographers, and it shows her in a way that we have not seen her before. This is a younger Harriet, and so we were able to use that photograph as the basis in working with the sculptors at Studio Ice to create a sculpture of her as she may have appeared in around 1864 when the abolition occurred.
And I think it's unique in the sense that while Tubman has been depicted, we're creating an image that very few people have seen. So to see her as a younger woman, I think, you know, it gives you pause.
I clay over on the surface.
What we're trying to do is create a kind of literal story, a kind of realism. I had a conversation once with Mr. Che, who's the head sculptor here, and we were working on a Lincoln sculpture, and he said, well, how will I know when I'm finished? And I said, you'll know when he looks back at you. And I think it's true. You'll feel the presence of that person. Once we're done in that process, we employ the lost wax method of bronze casting, and in the end, we'll use acid and blowtorches to create the surface coloration, which you see on all bronze sculptures. So it takes about a year from beginning to end. We want people to be able to come up to these sculptures and get as close as they want and touch them. I mean, they shouldn't be seen as precious objects. We're not in a museum. And I think to the extent that we have spent more than a year working with the two images that we're creating, we hope that that will be conveyed to the public that comes to visit.
I hope visitors will immediately feel a personal connection to these two individuals. Because they are going to be literally standing on the ground with them and able to be touched and interacted with, I hope they'll feel a connection and try to appreciate what their life stories represent to American history and what it means to have them here in our State House sort of finally represented and appreciated in a way that they hadn't been before.
If people actually have a reaction to these, and it causes them to think about our history and things that we value, I can't think that there's anything better. I think it's a great thing.